I have three questions. One is broad, and then it narrows into a more specific question. Uh, Beyond traditional diplomacy that focuses on economic ties, in what ways can we leverage the orange economy, the cultural economy as part of our approach to building diplomatic ties with our neighbors, especially those in Africa, where we are breaking new ground in some regards, and I guess globally. That's the first question.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The approach to Africa, I think, must, without any deviation, include the aspect of what you call the orange economy. It is all too easy, I think, for us to see this purely as a matter of trying to build up tourism relationships, take ourselves out of the space into which we have boxed ourselves as being largely seen as a warm weather destination. And so therefore you go to Africa and you're trying now to have year-round tourism because they're not going to come here because the climate is warm. They're coming here for other reasons, and many of them will be heritage and genealogical and so on. But very closely linked to that is going to be the cultures of the two sides of the Atlantic. And I believe that in terms of our own economic development and our own economic self-interest, that is an area where we must try to deepen the relationship and build our capacity, build our understanding, and indeed get some technological transfer and skills transfer. Immediately coming to mind is a place like Nigeria, which is really a wonderful opportunity, whether one is interested in film, whether one is interested in fashion. The same principle arises with Ghana, the way in which basic craft has been elevated now to state-of-the-art industrial opportunity. These are some of the things that I believe that we have an ambition to be able to do. We may not be able to do it entirely on our own, but again, conversations must now take place more deeply and more meaningfully with respect to things like supply chains and value-added value chains, so that you can ensure that there is a greater return on the efforts that our people are making. I believe that the orange economy is an indispensable part of it. I think also that this is an opportunity for the cross-fertilization of our people, the people-to-people experience, whether it be in drama, whether it be in music. You know, you can, my mind goes, for example, to a festival that takes place in South Africa annually now, I believe, where they use the steel pan and derivatives of pan. And it is a very interesting thing that Africa as a whole now participates in that. And I'm not entirely sure the extent to which, if at all, the Caribbean is involved. But surely it should and ought to be a place where, again, our own musical experience and opportunities can cross-fertilize. And that translates itself now into recording artists being able to have opportunities that otherwise did not exist. And if I could, before I will invite my Director General to share some thoughts on this matter, because she has served in places like Cuba and Haiti, where she knows firsthand that the cultural experience has been incredible. But for me, it is also, your question gives rise to a very interesting point.
We have one minute, Honourable.
Sorry. We have to, I'll be quick, sir. We have to learn from some of the failures along the way and mistakes. With Europe, one of the things in our economic partnership agreement about which we really have to be, I think, ashamed, is that we were given an opportunity for all of our cultural artists to enter into Europe, and all of the requirements that applied for services, applied for trading goods, etc., were waived, and the gateway was open for our artists to enter Europe. That we have not done so is simply because of administrative and bureaucratic, I think, fumbling in this region. And it has restricted some of the opportunities that our artists and creative expression has had in that marketplace. I believe we have to make sure we don't recommit that mistake in the African region. But Director General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister has covered a wide gamut of the areas, but certainly culture represents an opportunity for expanding partnerships with our bilateral partners in a number of areas, which can even extend into commercial activities. So there we have the cross-fertilization of cultural diplomacy and commercial diplomacy. And certainly Barbados's cultural assets are at the level, are at world-class levels. And in addition to the traditional areas of music and film and literature, we also have the opportunity, for example, of inviting researchers and to participate and to do research not only into our history, but into our present endeavors. Some countries, Cuba has a book fair, and there are other countries that do have the opportunities for our writers and our poets to expose their work and also to have their works translated so that Barbadian literature can be exposed to a wider variety of audiences, translated to Chinese, to Japanese, to non-traditional languages and cultures who might only know Barbados from one perspective, and that is as a tourist destination. And certainly through the kind of cultural partnerships which we are exploring, and many others which have the potential to be explored, this is another way of increasing Barbados's footprint. Because already our image, the minister spoke, and it was the late Kofi Annan who described Barbados as a country that punches above its weight. And certainly we have seen that with the success of Rihanna. But there are many other Rihannas out there, if given the opportunity, and not only in the sphere of music, but in other areas as well, that we can leverage our cultural assets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Many years ago, and this is just leading to my second question, I traveled to China. It wasn't that many years ago, 8 years ago, to a youth summit. I, of course, was the higher end of young, or higher end of what could be considered youth at that time. But I traveled with a number of young people from Barbados, from the Caribbean, from Latin America. And what they did was that they exposed us to all aspects of Chinese culture. The idea was that you be exposed and you return home and you talk about it. And believe me, I've been talking about that experience for the past 8 years. Whenever I get opportunity to speak about it, I talk about it. I think that was part of the soft power that countries like China use in trying to share with the world something that they value. And I think to Barbados, we also have young people that we would want to utilize in that sense. And my question is, how are we using the youth? You know, how are we engaging youth to putting them out there, sending them out there to help shape the Barbadian image of, you know, what we want persons in the world to see. That's what the representation of Barbados. We know that they have the capability, they have the digital capability. They also have that young, those new fangled ideas that you're seeing the young people come up with. How are we using those young people? You know, those people from our universities, our young creatives, to help frame the image of Barbados and also help, you know, in terms of promoting the country's interests internationally?
Honourable Member, I think that you're raising a very important question, and you know, I think that the answer, if I go straight to the root of it, is we are using them in a very limited way, and that there's a tremendous room for opportunity. My friend, the Director General, and I would have met far too long ago for me to say here, because it will compromise her desire to keep her age secret. But we met as teenagers in an Alliance Française student exchange program in Martinique, well, between Martinique and Barbados. And the exposure, the experience was tremendous. And I think the linguistic skill development was also very useful. The way in which that was done is something that could be replicated for other purposes, and especially those of a developmental nature, above and beyond just understanding culture and understanding language. It can also be done in terms of helping people to understand business and understand governance, understand technological advancements, etc. I know that there are those who have been able in other parts of the world to use workshops and expose with a targeted focus on young people and exposure of young people. To be fair to the Chinese, I think your example brings to mind, or your experience brings to mind, an ongoing program with the People's Republic of China where they reach out. I am not sure if it is correct to say on an annual basis, but certainly at least biannually there is a delegation of young people who are culled from government departments, first of all, but other areas in Barbados where they're able to experience, I think, a 3 or 4 week exposure in different parts of China, and are invariably linked to technological developments and opportunities and so on over there. I know some people who have done it, and I know that they have come back. It is not an English expression, forgive Mr. Chairman, but they've come back wowed by what they have experienced in China. So I think it is something that is definitely an option. It is something that is really, to the extent that we do it, we are not doing it consciously in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What we are doing is working with the University of the West Indies, and we've started to put a framework in place so that we can not only just have students come in and spend a period of time with us here, but also I want them to be able to spend a period of time in our missions overseas, part of the exposure to what the missions do, and understanding that aspect of our international relationship development. Again, the other thing I would say very quickly is that part of the concern I have about CARICOM is that we have an opportunity to do far more within CARICOM for our young people in terms of helping them be exposed to the questions of governance and participating, even if only as persons sitting in the room in the context of some of the deliberations of our Council on Social Development, our Council on Trade and Economic Development, and so on. I think that those are opportunities which really we should be granted to some of the senior school people and university students as well. And hopefully that day will come. The ministry will do a Diplomat for the Day exercise. I believe that is done with Canada. We're part of it. Director General, please speak a little bit to that, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Minister. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs right now is a partner with the High Commission of the United Kingdom and the Canadian High Commission in Barbados. We are a co-sponsor of a Diplomat for a Day program where we are working with schools, with school children, exposing them to the rudiments of diplomacy and the practice of foreign policy. And they're engaged in a competition. And at the end of the day, the diplomat for the day will be chosen, and they will be serving in a representative capacity with us in the Foreign Ministry and with the High Commissions of Canada and the United States. And indeed, these are the kinds of programs which have tremendous potential as we seek to attract people to the foreign service, but not only to the foreign service so that they can appreciate the importance of representational duty on behalf of Barbados. But as you pointed out, there are a number of areas for potential involvement of the youth, and certainly we need to explore and develop more programs like that as active parts of our own foreign policy development and practice.
And my final question, oftentimes when we think about the colonization of these islands here in the Caribbean by the English, we think about the kidnapping, spiriting of persons, black bodies from Africa, from the coast of Africa, and bringing them here. We talk about forced labor, slavery, chattel slavery, hardship. Very little is mentioned about the soft power that was used by the British, by the English, to colonize people in the Caribbean region. The use of sport, the use of culture, the use of cricket especially. Cricket is perhaps the best example of soft power used by the British. You know, teach us to play, make us want to play cricket. We still want to play cricket today. And that made us more British than anything else. That made us want to be part of the system, the British system, the British culture. Now we have our own culture. We have our own indigenous sport. We have that one indigenous sport that we have in road tennis. And I've seen that we've made some efforts to export road tennis throughout the Caribbean. My brother, he's been to, I think, St. Vincent, St. Lucia to help to train persons in that. I saw footage of the Rwandan president some years ago persons playing in the street in Rwanda. And I'm wondering where we are with those kind of programs, that kind of initiative to promote the Barbadian way through our sport.
Honourable Member, this is an excellent question that you're asking, and the truth of the matter is that you're right, it is a matter of soft power. It is something that this region is very capable of doing in myriad forms. In Jamaica, the use of the reggae, all those things surrounding reggae. In Trinidad, the use of steel pan and calypso by extension. And as you have quite rightly pointed out, here in Barbados, this matter of road tennis. Now, again, let me just go back to the example you used, because I think it is a good example. When England did this, they also controlled the fruits that could be derived from it. So while you were peddling the soft power, you also had a regulatory authority, first of all, that was set up in England, controlled by England. You had, beyond the rules and the regulatory authority, the manufacturing process. So that those things that had to be created, whether it be the pads, whether it be the balls, whether it be the bats, etc., all were up to fairly recent times when Australia and India then subsequently got involved in the manufacturing process, first of all derived from the United Kingdom. I want to say to you that our weakness with road tennis is the structures that we have failed to put around road tennis. So that yes, we have introduced it to the world. I was present in both in Barbados and in Rwanda when the game was first introduced to the Rwandese. I have seen it being introduced in other areas, but I continue to remind my friends in the Ministry of Sports that there is an ongoing duty for us to be a little bit more diligent. And in my judgment, this is where there's now an intersection with sports, an intersection with foreign policy, and an intersection with our manufacturing capacity as a country, and those types of related interests. First of all, we have to register the intellectual property, if the Honourable Senior Minister would allow me. We have to register, if the Honourable Senior Minister Duguid would allow me, we have to register our intellectual property on this matter. That we have not yet done so is something that continues to concern me. Above and beyond that, we have to recognize that there are rules. And yes, you could introduce the game to everybody, but somebody at one point is going to formalize this and make it, and try to take it global. I believe Barbados is excellently positioned to do this. But again, if we just simply say to Prime Minister from Rwanda and 100 other Rwandese gathered in a meeting in a park, as happened, well, this is a court, and this is the net, and so on. But what is the specific height of the net? What is the specific length of the court? Is the ball going to be used in the women's game the same weight as the ball in the men's game? What is the diameter of the racket? Of what should the racket be made? Those are some of the questions that we have to settle, we have to fix, and it ain't hard. But then we formalize a structure around it, and we make it our own, and hopefully we then manufacture the rackets that we say are the specific requirements, and if we're wise, we find some things that are uniquely Barbadian about those rackets and balls and nets that allow us to own it and own the process as we go forward and sell it to the rest of the world, so that the sporting endeavor becomes a commercial endeavor, which in turn becomes something that can be given life above and beyond just an impulse, recreational impulse. I think that is where there's opportunity. I truly love your question because it asks us to think a little bit out of the box. But again, I know that this is not beyond us to do.
Thank you, Minister. And from listening to you, I can even hear a little passion in your voice there. I can tell you some of those things are already in place, yes? So it's just a matter of getting the other things in place and just the implementation, because we're already there. We're already there. We have standardized the game. The game has come a long way since I was first introduced to it as a child. So I think it's just to do the other part now. Just in terms of promoting it overseas, in terms of, as you said, we have to patent it, I guess, because somebody will see the benefit of it and they will take it from us like others have tried in the past to take from our neighbors. And we cannot allow for that to happen when we already have the necessary skill set person here on island who can make that happen. So having said it here,
Thank you, Honourable Member. You have had your opportunity. Let us move on in the interest of time, accommodating all members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you. I guess I would not have to answer this question on Monday. What I would say to Senior Minister is all of the things that he would have outlined just now that are necessary and required to move road tennis forward. Plans are very much in train, and I believe that we're less than 2 months away from having all of the information that he suggested should be in place. As I speak, there's a member of staff that is in Africa looking to promote road tennis. We have had the discussions with a senior lawyer on island in association with the BOA to fix the issue of road tennis. My question, Senior Minister, I only have one question for you. From time to time, I've been having some major issues in relation to sports and our young people who are traveling. Late last year, I had a situation where a team was going to India and 4 members were stranded in the States without the requisite visa to travel. There's a youngster who is supposed to complete a last semester in the US, but the F1 visa is not available to him. My question is it possible to have an officer within your ministry as a point person to deal with the myriads of problems that we're having in sports as it relates to travel, as it relates to interacting with the US Embassy to have the same F1 visa put in place? Because it really is problematic for a lot of teams that are traveling who need to have these issues fixed. One of the things that I have asked the national federations is to make sure that they contact your ministry to let you know when they're traveling, or to do it through my ministry, because of the problems that we're having. So is it possible to have a point person assigned, not specifically related to the ministry, but to deal with issues that we're having with the F1 visas and issues in relation to some of our national teams or clubs traveling? Thank you.
Honourable Member, I am going to allow my permanent secretary to respond to you. While she gathers her thoughts, let me just simply say to you that I'm glad that you have engaged an attorney, and that from that it tells me that the intellectual property aspect of your work is underway, and I hope that when you speak of 2 months in terms of your long-term and end of your plan, you're also including in that the manufacturing process, because I believe that that is a critical component of us being able to own and control and benefit commercially from the fruits of this road tennis game. Let me say to the permanent secretary that the question being asked obviously is a very operational one on a day-by-day basis, and I hope, ma'am, that you were able to answer it in a way that I certainly cannot, because those things do not come to my attention invariably, Minister.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very short response is yes. We have a very small division that deals with consular matters, of which requests for visas, the short stay, such as tourism-related visas, as well as other specialized visas for performing and sporting activities, etc. We are prepared, of course, to provide the assistance when requested. However, bear in mind that different countries have different visa requirements for different pursuits. And in each case where there may be some peculiarities, we would definitely have to engage the embassy or the country in question on the case. And I think it would be best if enough time is given to allow for that. Some visas are quite time consuming. We dealt with one for a tennis player last year, and it took quite a lot of time. And most of the work related to obtaining that visa was to be pursued by the individual and not by the ministry or the government. But what the ministry was able to do was to clarify with the embassy concerned all that was required in order to obtain the requisite visa for his pursuits. So I hope that that's helpful. Certainly we can, after this session, identify how you should channel from your ministry requests related to such activities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, PS. I will ask my PS to be in contact with you, that could be sorted out. And Senior Minister, you're absolutely correct. We have also started to look at manufacturing of the balls, all of the guidelines that you spoke about in relation to how the game should be played, all of that is already in place. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Just let me add that in the interest of time, we move quickly to St. Michael North, and we ask you to get to your question as quickly as possible and reduce, if not totally eliminate, the introductory speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree, save and accept to congratulate the Senior Minister and his team for the excellent work that they're doing to rebuild our reputation as a nation. Not only this Senior Minister, but his predecessor in the office from 2018 would have done a phenomenal job at restoring our reputation as a small island developing state, and I think they need to be congratulated for that. My question relates to foreign trade, and we have made some discussion, that we have had significant discussion during the course of the proceedings thus far on bilateral agreements. And we have spoken about them in the context of our relationship with the rest of the world. I would like the Senior Minister and his team to further expand on how these bilateral agreements that we have, and he can also highlight at this stage, if he so desires, any incoming and proposed bilateral agreements that are on the cards that will be able to benefit our people locally as it relates to trade. I know that we have entities in Barbados such as the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Barbados Manufacturers Association, Export Barbados, Invest Barbados. All of these entities are working assiduously to seek out opportunities across the globe for our local manufacturers and our tradesmen. And I would love to hear from the team here in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade as it relates to their perspective on our existing agreements. How are we maximizing and leveraging those in the interests of these individuals, and any proposed bilateral agreements that will be able to benefit the people of Barbados as it relates to trade? That is the one and only question I have for you, Senior Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. And let me begin by saying to you that we have a number of trade agreements, and they're perhaps too numerous to mention. The regional ones perhaps are the ones that I think we should focus on strategically at this point, and they would be with Costa Rica, the CARICOM Costa Rica, CARICOM Dominican Republic, CARICOM Cuba, CARICOM Colombia, CARICOM Venezuela. I believe there's one with Chile as well. There are, and I say CARICOM because of the fact that we tend to do these agreements as part of CARICOM and not necessarily by ourselves. However, it is possible within the rules for us to have or to initiate a more direct agreement between Barbados and another. There are none that we have done, but it is my judgment that we should trigger, and I have said this on Wednesday, when last we were here, Tuesday, the day that I was last here, I said this with respect to Canada. There is, in my judgment, every reason why we should be having and should have had a serious sit-down on a partial scope agreement. And when you say partial scope, effectively what you're saying is not a broad free trade agreement, but carving out an area where you believe that you have significant competition potential and capacity, and to try to ensure that you get access to the market there so that you can give your people in that particular sector or sectors of your capacity and competition potential the greatest opportunity in this new market space. Canada, in my judgment, is one of those countries, and what would we be interested in? We would be interested in the sale of services into Canada. I believe that we have tangible evidence of our capacity in this regard. There are several insurance companies in Barbados, and I don't only focus on Sagicor in this regard, who have been able to move their business from the 166 square miles of Barbados into the wider Caribbean area and replicate and do so successfully. Construction companies have been able to do the same thing. There are a few locally owned hotels which have been able to do the same thing, albeit in some cases differently branded. So, but same people behind it. Car rentals, food and beverage, there are a number of them. And I genuinely think that part of what we must now do, and I think I used the expression when last I was here, is to put on your big boy pants and have the conversation with some of these countries. Now, prior to this new presidency in the United States of America, I would have felt confident that a conversation of that nature should and could also take place with them. One would have now to test the water and the appetite of that particular jurisdiction to have such a discussion with us. But the reason why I focus on those two is because for a long time we have been laboring under what I do not accept as being an adequate arrangement, whereby you have a gift of a market access given to us by, I can't remember which Canadian Prime Minister it was, but it was market access for some commodities for CARICOM under CARIBCAN, and equally by President Ronald Reagan around and about the same time with regard to market access into the United States of America. The problem there is that there are preferential arrangements. They're not compatible with the World Trade Organization's rules, and therefore at the whim and at the discretion of the entity which has given you this agreement, they can equally take it away. They can say, I'm not going to the World Trade Organization, ask for it to be renewed. And so I believe in legal certainty, and I believe that we should be giving our business people a degree of certainty. And in the context of services, we know that we have been able to reach a level of expertise and a level of competitiveness. Sitting in this room are service providers at an individual level who have been able to earn a decent living in several other jurisdictions in this region and in some cases outside of the region. And therefore, I believe that we must unleash that potential. And that is how I see the trade agreements unfolding. Now, there's another point, and let me be very candid with you. It is not hunky-dory. I have come to recognize that this country has a lot of work to do, and this region, by extension, has a lot of work to do in terms of maximizing the use of the trade agreements we now have. And it is important that we unlock their fullest potential. There are some agreements really which have effectively sat on a shelf and not been exploited by the business people in Barbados or by extension CARICOM. And that is a conversation that obviously is going to have to take a little bit of time. It deals with unfamiliarity, it deals with linguistic barriers, it deals with a tradition, a cultural tradition to look to the North Atlantic, to put on blinkers and see the USA and Canada alone, but that is not the world that we live in anymore. And part of what we must now do is to recognize that connected to that is things like new supply chains and cost of living issues and those types of considerations. I see your look, Mr. Chairman. I will pause there.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Allow me first to express thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and I speak particularly about the excellent relationship that the ministry, which I have the honor to lead, has with the mission and the officers of the mission stationed at Geneva. And this is in relation to the International Labour Organization. And I must say the team approach across the two ministries is an excellent one. It is also anchored, return to he who the Honourable Minister referred to in such glowing terms, who is sitting currently behind him, who we turn to sometimes to add to the team and to give us some guidance. The question I have really relates to one that you would ordinarily think about in relation to the ministry responsible for agriculture. Now, my mind goes back, not fondly, but to the period of the pandemic and the matter of imports, the matter of being able to eat, hearing what was happening in some other jurisdictions with respect to shortages. And I became aware recently that the CARICOM heads discuss the matter of food security. I'd heard before that of the programs or proposed programs either through the Caribbean Private Sector Organization and a kind of an anchoring with Guyana. And I'm wondering, because I think it is something that my constituents may not be aware of, what role would a ministry like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have with respect to food security? And I think it is a question that I would want some clarity on, and I'm absolutely sure that my constituents would as well.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And Honourable Member, the reality is that once we are seeing ourselves not just as an island state of 166 square miles, but rather as a part of a region within which there is an economic pact, and that is the single market and economy, then you understand that we are able now to see ourselves beyond 166 square miles and, quite frankly, part of the Guyanese marketplace, part of the Surinamese marketplace, part of the Jamaican marketplace, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the question of food security turns on a number of issues. In Barbados, we recognize that there's intense competition for available land space. The renewable energy sector, for example, when it was introduced, was exceptionally land hungry. And the first thinking was, before we started to use rooftops, that you must put all of in association with people's rooftops. You wanted to put photovoltaic farms and spread them out across the ground. And then it became apparent that you have to find a way of co-investing with agriculture to get that done. But the truth is that the agricultural investment, the co-investment with renewable energy has been very limited. And what we therefore need to do is to recognize that we do need land space if we are going to do two things. And there are two critical ambitions. On one hand, you want to ensure that you have your food security. And then on the other hand, you want to make sure that the cost of living issues are wrestled to the ground. Now, we have been able, therefore, by way of negotiation with some countries that do have substantial land space, for example, first of all, Suriname, to come to a strategic cooperative agreement. And that strategic cooperative agreement will see collaboration in crop production, collaboration in fisheries, collaboration in transportation logistics. And the transportation logistics becomes important because obviously Suriname is some distance away from Bridgetown. But what we must do is to be able to find a way of getting crops and fish from there to here. And that then involved Suriname Airways at one point, and then I believe the other airline was called Fly Always. So that is one aspect of the agreement, one aspect of the collaboration. Beyond that, there's obviously Guyana. And you would have heard a lot being said about our relationship with Guyana. And again, through negotiation, and let me not just say it is just foreign affairs, because people like to lambaste our Prime Minister for traveling. Tremendous amount of work has been done by the President of Guyana and the Prime Minister of Barbados to knit this relationship together. And they did not and could not have done it from their respective offices, either in Georgetown or Bridgetown. The collaboration has now come to a point where there is almost a daily, if not weekly, interface between the Ministry of Agriculture in Barbados and the Ministry of Agriculture in Guyana. There is an established working group between the agricultural ministries in Suriname, Guyana, and Barbados on food and nutritional security. There is, in Barbados, we are doing a lot of work now on a tissue culture lab. And from Guyana, we will source the tissue culture for fruits and crops which are grown over there so that we can do the necessary scientific, I am not the specialist in the area, but the scientific work has to be done in order to be able to make sure that you can transfer from planting material from one country to another and do it successfully. Equally, we live in a time where we have to be very candid, Minister, about a few things that I'm going to speak to now straight from the heart. So forgive me. You know, this country uses a lot of chicken. Where do we source the hatching eggs from? Almost all are sourced from out of the United States of America. And that has been a state of affairs with which we have been very content for a prolonged period of time. Now the United States of America is facing a serious case of bird flu. And therefore the hatching eggs that we have become so reliant on, and we have not had any diversification of the source market, Their challenge is that they are not in a position to sell to us safely and in keeping with sanitary and phytosanitary standards, hatching eggs. So what then do we do about the poultry industry in Barbados? Harnessed as it now is to a country that has not so managed its public health infrastructure in a manner that ensures or can guarantee safety for others to whom it exports. So we must now be able to have the conversations with Guyana and with places like Brazil and so on, so that we can diversify that reliance and dependence solely on one marketplace to another in order to keep our poultry industry alive, keeping us in a position to keep chicken on the shelves for Barbadians, first of all, and by extension, in the hotels for those who come to visit us. And the visitors at this time of year are probably twice as many, if not 3 times as many on the island as there are Barbadians born and bred normally living here. So it is a serious issue. You would have heard as well conversations about food terminal and the use of a food terminal, and then on the last occasion that I was here, I spoke to that matter. It is again about using flights from Paramaribo in Suriname and from Georgetown with product to come into Barbados and to be able to, for us to do the value added here, which might be packaging and blast freezing and whatever else that we must do. And we're not just talking about now food crops like cassava, yam, plantain, et cetera, but we're also talking about meat and fish, which we can then sell onward to the Caribbean diaspora using Grantley Adams Airport infrastructure and capacity to get to Canada every day, to get to the United Kingdom 12 times a day, to get to the United States. Lord knows how many times a day and how many ports that is, but it is certainly in excess of 10, and so on. So that those are the arrangements which are facilitated by the collaboration between the countries, and that can only be done through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Where we are now is going to the next step. We had, during the Heads of Government conference that just was completed.
Honourable Member, you have 1 minute to tell us.
Certainly, sir. During the Heads of Government conference that was just completed, Mr. Chairman, we had an in-depth look at the ferry, the proposed ferry communication between our countries in the Southern Caribbean in particular. We also we have a committee established where foreign ministers will be dealing with some of the technical issues that must be resolved. For example, from my end, I must speak with a number of the people in the insurance industry to make sure that product can be insured. There are issues of sanitary and phytosanitary parity so that we make sure that our regulations are harmonized. Those requirements which we need to get food out of Guyana to Barbados are identical to what you're going to use from Suriname to Barbados or Suriname to Guyana, giving the business people certainty in order to ensure market access. Those are some of the technical things that now have to be worked through and finalized, and we have been given, I believe, a period of 3 or 4 months to get that done and then to report to the chairman, who is the Prime Minister of Barbados.
One follow-up, and it relates to, when I heard, through you, Chair, the Senior Minister speak, I thought about all the collaboration that is taking place across some countries. And I'm wondering if there are any other areas that the minister could speak to with respect to the view that I hear sometimes in my constituency, which suggests that, the question is asked, let me put it this way, the question is asked, why does Barbados pay so much attention to CARICOM? I've heard one or two people say, it seems as though Barbados is the only country interested in CARICOM. And I think we had a really good exposition just now on the matter of food and agriculture. Are there any other bits of information that the minister would want to share that could assist us in informing the public as to why Barbados pays so much attention to CARICOM?
Honourable Member, I think that that part of what you hear is an unthinking reaction, and sometimes we are guilty, despite having spent a lot of time being educated, of doing ourselves a disservice about very serious matters. CARICOM for Barbados and for every member state of CARICOM, quite frankly, right now in this world, is a matter of life and death. I begin by what I said repeatedly. There needs to be a collective voice for those of us who are so small and could be rendered so insignificant as to be voiceless and irrelevant. I use the example of today in answering a question about the fact that if we look at Grenada's public health system right now, they have one anesthesiologist if you took all of the Cuban doctors out of Grenada. There's that fragility across our region. So that for us in Barbados, let me begin by saying that 53% of all the goods and services that we sell go into CARICOM. It is the only place on planet Earth with whom we have a competitive trade advantage. And so therefore, if you take CARICOM out of the picture, there's nobody buying the vast majority of things that we produce, and so businesses in Barbados would simply be shut down and people rendered unemployed. By extension, we have the reality of our functional cooperation. The police service here has for a long time been the place, or had the headquarters, that was for a long time the place to which everybody came in order to be trained. When they come here to be trained, they have to live somewhere. They have to be able to eat something. They have to clothe and recreate themselves. That is money for this country and for business people in this country. The Regional Security Service provides security cross assistance for all of us in this region, a region that is now highly sensitive to some serious challenges in terms of the fight against narcotics, the fight against gang activity. We all know the concern about guns, et cetera, et cetera. And that regional security service, at a time when technical assistance is being pulled by large powers, we are able to rely on colleagues from within the region to collaborate and work with us. Honourable member, I can go on and on. We are trying to build out a renewable energy platform in this country, and we must, as we train more people, be able to deploy them as well. Not only in Barbados is there going to be an opportunity, but equally, let us accept and understand that in Grenada, and in Dominica, and in St. Lucia, and in St. Vincent, and we can go on, there will equally be a desire to use renewable energy. So all of these young people that we are training right now in Barbados, who will be given jobs in the RE sector, are effectively the port of first call for others in this region who need to be able to deploy skills, but they do not have, and will be looking to us because we are developing that skill set as a first mover and getting the first mover advantage. Our hospital has for a long time been the teaching hospital for this region. And Honourable Member, I hope by now you understand the perspective that I am trying to shape here. CARICOM is our heartbeat. And frankly, it has kept many businesses in Barbados afloat and alive, and the cooperation in this region is more vital now than ever as the global environment becomes increasingly either uncooperative or perhaps antagonistic. I didn't want to use any other phrase than that.
Thank you very much, Chair and Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael, South Central.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask, through you to the Minister, there's a sub-program related to climate change, SIDS, and law of the sea. And I heard the Honourable Minister speak in a reply to an earlier question about the Bridgetown Initiative, our relationship with emerging industrial giants, or perhaps not so emerging like China, that country's interest in renewable energy and so on. Now, while we're clear on what the Bridgetown Initiative says and intends to do, and notwithstanding China's interest in renewable energy, and this is not to comment on the industrial policy of China or any particular country, but I want us to look at some of the practical developments in geopolitics and in emerging industry, because we are in a position where there is, in some cases, a halt in terms of commitment to reduction in emissions, and in some cases, a full withdrawal. More countries than ever are delayed in submitting revised nationally determined contributions to restate and be more ambitious on their emissions reduction. We also have a situation where the industries that rely most on energy are the industries that are growing, including here in Barbados. So that, for example, chemical manufacturing, including pharmaceuticals, relies heavily on energy. Data centers and 5G network build-out rely heavily on energy. And these are the industries that are sweeping the world. So what are some of the practical considerations that Barbadians should understand and know about that your ministry is confronting and the conversations that you're having to get behind the agreements and the documents and get to the heart of what we need from industrialized nations to continue to meet their commitments?
It is a very wide question, Honourable Member, and I'm going to try my best within the time allocated. The truth is that let me start with the point, which was your point of departure. There has been either a withdrawal by some major industrialized powers or a reduction or a halt in some cases in terms of the commitment or expressions of commitment or the extent of the commitments which they have made towards reduction of greenhouse gases. I think that Europe has been a classic example of that. The war in the Ukraine has been an excuse for many in Europe to start to burn coal again. But even as they do that, there is clearly a double speak and perhaps a double standard, because the expressions directed towards us in the developing world are of increasingly aggressive demands that we take the greenhouse gases out of our industrial process, and otherwise we cannot access the European market. When the European Commission President von der Leyen was here last week, I raised this matter with her in the presence of the heads, because Europe has in place a policy which is called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and it is really designed to say effectively that unless you can provide a tremendous amount of data on your industrial process in any given country and satisfy them that your industrial process has seen a reduction in the use of carbon and therefore it is a clean, according to them, process, then you will pay a heavy penalty or a tariff at arrival in Europe. Now, while that does not immediately impact us in terms of all of the goods that have been identified, and certainly what we now sell into Europe, there are two considerations. One, it is open to the Europeans just as they put that in place to expand the categories that will ultimately impact on us. And secondly, the capacity that we have as small states to do all of these things in terms of the identification of the extent to which there is greenhouse gases involved in any industrial capacity taking place in this region. You were minister responsible for industry, and I am sure that your ministry does not have in its capacity right now the ability to say that you're holding data on any industrial process taking place in Barbados. So therefore, where are we? We have to have a foreign ministry that works in partnership with other foreign ministries of countries which are similarly positioned to ours and countries which frankly may be similarly impacted as ours, so that we avoid what may be the unintended, let's put it that way, unintended consequence of there being a new green protectionism. That Europe closes its doors to our trade, closes its doors to importations from us, cuts us off from economic opportunity in spite of all of the long talk and so on about creating new avenues of trade, because of the fact that they are interested in protecting themselves from competition, one, on the premise that our goods are produced in circumstances which are harmful to the environment. Now, the truth of the matter is that that has to be something that we approach with a certain sense of probity and clarity, because we need to be sure-footed. We need to understand that we are dealing with countries now, and let's not only say Europe, others are following this practice as well, this carbon border mechanism, whereby once you sell goods into this country, a country of choice, they now erect a tariff wall against you and say, we must protect ourselves because you have not contributed enough to reducing greenhouse gases in the environment. It would render small states like Barbados and Antigua and St. Kitts and so on defenseless, and we would face economic ruination simply because we do not have the capacity. And the way in which these matters are to be dealt with would now have to be carefully negotiated because the capacity of small states being more limited than the capacity of large states. And let me pause now to say to this House that the battle is really with the large states themselves, some of whom say to Europe, you are being unfair to us because we ourselves, though we are on a similar footing, can't meet the requirements that you are asking and that they are too exacting and too demanding. That's what the Indians are saying. So if that is a problem for India, what do you think it would be for a small state like ours? These are some of the issues which are now affecting us now. And equally, it raises the question of climate justice. Because, Honourable Member, as you are well aware, in all that we have been saying and doing in the Bridgetown Initiative, we are trying to get the world to a point of climate justice. What is fair and just and equitable for small states like ours, in Barbados example? The industrial policy of the world must be one which gives us an opportunity to produce and to sell and to access some of the fundamentals and some of the technologies which are necessary for us to make our economy, as the Honourable Member from Christchurch would say, clean and green. And that industrial policy, we have seen the hardship of already. I need not say to this House, the Prime Minister came here in a budget a few years ago and indicated that we would remove the tariffs on EVs and hybrids, and we had to wait 2 years in many cases for people to get an EV or hybrid because we were the last to be put on stream. And truth is, China would have then been the country which moved first and fastest in order to make sure that we were able to get them into this country. Battery storage continues to be an issue that plagues the Ministry of Energy, and we can go on and on. I am mindful of the time, sir.
Thank you.
It was a very important question.
I think I'm the only one that remains. It sometimes helps to be the last or the least, so I'll continue with my follow-up question, if I might.
Yes, but still within the stipulated time, though,
Thank you
because
so
the
much,
Honourable
Chair.
Minister will have to wrap up, etc.
Thank you so much. Quickly, through you, Chair, to the Honourable Minister, there is a sub-program related to a diaspora unit in these estimates. And for some time, we've spoken about how we leverage the assets and resources of Barbadians in the diaspora. And I am not sure that we have a report or the evidence of the effort. I wanted to give the Minister an opportunity to speak to what has been done and how we expect that this will be strengthened with the specifics in terms of how it might impact local investment, what we've seen so far, how can we quantify the efforts of this unit.
Minister, I'm entirely grateful to you for this question because in September, when it became apparent to me that the outcome of the presidential election in the United States of America was going to be what it has been, I had a sit down with my Director General and my Permanent Secretary on the issue of where do we go in the event of a change of administration. And what concerned me then was some of the rhetoric, which is not really the reality, of what was portending, what was threatening for our diaspora up there. And I'm not only going to focus on the United States, Honourable Member, but I'm going to focus more broadly on the North Atlantic, because the truth is there is a replication of that which we hear in Washington, D.C., with what we hear being resonated in some parts of France, what we hear in Germany, what we hear in Italy, and our diaspora, in fact, in Canada. And our diaspora is wide. And I think that the first thing that we needed to, or certainly I wanted to do, was to plug what I consider to be a gaping hole. This country does not have a diaspora policy. And I have expressed in no uncertain terms my dedication and determination that this ministry now have a diaspora policy. What will a diaspora policy do? It will enable us to have some increased engagement, in my judgment, and increased participation with engagement and participation in national development of the diaspora, wheresoever it is to be found. That enables us to do a number of things. We can build partnerships with diaspora in terms of a number of our sectors of this economy and society, because we know that there are skill sets, some of whom are exceptional in their expertise. We had a professor of international relations do a seminar for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs either this week or last week. I must tell you, it was an eye-opening expose, but his skills and skills such as his should be at the disposal of the government of Barbados, in my judgment. And there are several other areas where, as I had indicated to the House before, we have a deficiency in skills, and I think our port of first call should in fact be the diaspora. Equally, we have to be able to put in place some standards for the way in which we ensure the well-being of people in host communities. Barbadian people should not feel that they're left naked and alone in host communities when there is a hostility against how they look or where they have come from in those communities where many of them are working 2 and 3 shifts a day. And I feel that we have a duty to look after those people and to find a way of using our missions to ensure that they can be connected, as I said on a previous occasion, with places like the entities like the Civil Liberties Union in the United States, and have opportunities to know and learn their rights and be facilitated in that regard. I also feel that we have to have a better recognition of the diaspora associations and the way in which they function, and facilitate, use them to help us to facilitate their reintegration, whether that reintegration, Honourable Member, is forced or voluntary when they have to reintegrate into our society. Right now, there is too little connection between capital and many of the diaspora associations, and that has to be strengthened. Now, by no means least is my concern about optimizing trade and investment. And I believe, Minister, you hinted at this in your, Honourable Member, you hinted at this in your submission just now. Let's face facts. In many cases, diaspora is not just there. These are people who are working and earning a living in many instances. Remittances are often sent home, but there is no financial literacy on the receiving end, and sometimes it is necessary on the giving end, so that we are able to ensure that the use of remittances is as good and effective as it can possibly be. We also have a set of people in our diaspora who, as I indicated just now, have tremendous skills and tremendous expertise. And that expertise and skill set should, in my judgment, be deployed, whether it be in our public health system, in our education system, in private sector enhancement and development, areas of technological endeavor. There are areas where I believe we can better use, if we can harness and capture and identify what the specific skill sets are in our diaspora. And I believe it is also important to use technology. and to use the technology in a way that helps us to facilitate a better relationship with our diaspora. So it was drawn to my attention, for example, that in the United States, there are some people who are in the Barbadian community who are still unbanked. And how then do they, either when they want to move money from there to here, or want somebody here to help them out by sending them some money up there, get that transaction done? And the technological capacity does exist to assist people with this type of thing, and I believe that this is something that we should also be able to do. I believe that in the context of enabling us to have a role and a voice in governance in those places overseas. You know, in my constituency, Mr. Chairman, let me be frank with you. I look in the newspaper and I see people who are not Barbadian. There are visitors here lamenting and complaining about a policy of the Barbados government with respect to a spot in my constituency on the beach. Now, the reality is that their voice is being heard. And similarly, we need to make sure that we can ensure that the voice of Barbadians who have genuine concerns in parts of the world can be mobilized and heard. And part of the way in which we can do that is to help them bring themselves together and to engage with systems of government at various tiers of government, whether it be in the United Kingdom or in the United States of America, so that the interests of communities like ours is not taken for granted and we are not treated as mere flotsam and jetsam to be discarded at will or called upon when you feel you need to find somebody to work like a beast of burden and do 3 shifts in a day. And that is part of what this diasporic relationship as we go forward, in my judgment, needs to be. And I am hoping that we can have a national conversation on it once we have the diaspora policy in place and ready to be submitted to Cabinet, to be discussed internally first, and then go out for a broader review in the interest of the people of Barbados.
Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister through you, you talked about the skills that we may be able to draw on from those in the diaspora. And having heard from you in your response to an earlier question about the expansion of missions across territories that are allowing us to vary and diversify our foreign policy and relations away from established relationships, it seems to me that nowhere else are those kinds of skills more of value than within those missions themselves. There is a lot to discuss and understand about every sector in which Barbados functions, in each of those missions, in each of those territories. And the government, the cabinet, those who work in SOEs and those who are advancing Barbados's interests need intelligence, need analysis, need at a moment's notice in some cases to have briefs, have papers, have perspectives, have positions on these matters. What would you say is the current capacity of the missions that are represented here to provide those kinds of things to the government of Barbados and to our partners? And if you judge that they're not sufficient, what are the efforts going to be in this financial year to strengthen those?
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Before you respond, as you complete your response, you may proceed to wind up for no more than 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm really sorry that this question comes at the very end. That's probably a question that should have come at the beginning. In view of the challenges which we now face as a country, which I think are greater now than at any time in our history, in view of the fact that the age-old alliances upon which we were able to rely are now either fractured or are disappearing. And I remind this House that You know, on last time I was here on this matter, I alerted to the House that it was on that day that Sir Keir Starmer reduced overseas development assistance. Today, his overseas development minister has left the cabinet. The virtual collapse of U.S. aid, these are things that we never had to experience before, but these were all part of the platform on which this country, and by extension this region, was able to stand and rely. So that in this new world, the missions are highly stretched. I do not think I could say honestly, Minister, that any mission is at full strength, and therefore there's going to have to be an almost surgical re-examination of what our requirements are, what our priorities must be, and how do we make ourselves, either by way of use of technology or alternative use of skill sets that may be available in the different jurisdictions, where, again, perhaps we can draw on our diaspora, or friendly entities such as universities and so on with an interest in these types of matters to lend to the capacity of what Barbados must do. Again, I think that the solution does not only lie with us, but really in a collegiality in CARICOM. It takes me back to a question asked by the Honourable Member for St. Peter, because it is within that CARICOM grouping that we are perhaps going to be best able to find a deeper depth of personnel, and also a greater opportunity for us to, by way of collaboration, advance our causes. In terms of basic accommodation, I think we are having discussions already with shared space with CARICOM countries so as to enable that the voice of Barbados be able to be replicated in even more capitals while saving some money and having to set up your own place, your own brick and mortar place. So that, for example, in Japan, there is a Jamaican embassy, and it may well be that a conversation with Jamaicans enables us to share space. Or in Ghana, a conversation between ourselves and Trinidad enables Trinidad to share the space we have, and so on and so forth. I think that is really how we have to go forward as we tread these, navigate these uncertain waters. In terms of where these estimates are set, quite frankly, the estimates were set a while before what has been unfolding before our eyes over the course of the last few weeks has started to unfold. And in our wildest imagination, we could not have experienced a world then as it now is, and as it is likely to become as we go forward. So there's going to have, I have absolutely no doubt, there's going to have to be a need for myself to come back here and have a conversation with the House from time to time as challenges present themselves. Certainly I can envisage professional services, the professional services vote being a necessity for us to look at, because we are going to have now to have conversations with people that we've never had to have before about what are the rights of individuals who may be subjected to a form of scrutiny, and I almost said persecution, but that would not be a good word. A form of scrutiny that they have never been subjected to before. There's a need, I think, for us also to recognize that in terms of engagements at high level, this is not the time. This is simply not going to be the time for people to be heard simply saying a prime minister shouldn't leave the country, because it is going to be necessary. I watched CNN, as you do, Mr. Chairman, and in the space of 1 week, there are at least 3 or 4 European heads of state and government arriving in Washington, D.C. to plead a special case. It is unprecedented, but that is where the world now is. And unless we're prepared to engage even more deeply and more nimbly, because speed is going to be part of what we must do, then we're not going to be able to keep our heads above water. We have to increase our alliances with like-minded states, and we're going to have to make every effort to support efforts in research and in building out resources, which may not be financed directly by us, but with friendly alliances such as non-governmental associations and organizations and so on. So that in a nutshell, I hope honorable members should explain where we are right now. It requires a recommitment and a rethinking of what the traditional approach to foreign policy has been. Honorable members, Mr. Chairman, if I understand the direction from you well, you are inviting me to go straight into a wrap-up.
Into your wrap-up, 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. And I wouldn't trouble you for 10 minutes because I've been talking now for over 3 hours here. And I think I would only be repeating myself, and I don't want to do that. Let me say, sir, that I begin where I left off. This is a new world. We have witnessed business leaders, we have witnessed political leaders contort themselves before what is really a very large and powerful figure in the North Atlantic. Rules or ways of operation that we thought existed previously are now being revised before our very eyes and being revised every day. It is necessary for us to not just be able to build and maintain the relationships we have, but it's going to be necessary for us also to be able to have conversations. I think that as we go forward for Barbados, there is a need to be very measured and to exercise the best possible judgment and to engage sensibly and seriously on those things that are fundamental to our national security and national interest. We have already signaled to Washington, D.C. that we, along with the rest of CARICOM, would like to have some conversations because some of the things we see will impact on us. I use, for example, the fact that clearly it is a matter of policy that Barbados cannot meddle in, and we must respect the right of a state to exercise its own policy. But equally, the policy can have unintended consequences for us. And so therefore, if folks are going to be deported to Barbados, then we need to be able to have an idea and an arrangement in place where we can have a dossier on who is coming and from the background from whence they have come, and enable our welfare and social services entities and agencies here in Barbados to be able to relate to those persons who are returnees in a way that enables them best to be reintegrated into Barbadian society. We equally, Mr. Chairman, have to keep our heads above water. And we recognize that the way in which we understood tariffs to be used will not always be the way in which we understood it to be. But we also, too, have commercial interests, and we have to defend and promote those commercial interests as best we can. And equally, we must diversify our economy so that we have not reliance and dependence on one or on a few, but that we have a broad base of interactions rather than reliances and dependencies. But we have a broad base of interaction which enables us to be better in better shape to control some of our financial destiny. It gives opportunity and it gives certainty to our business people. Part of this conversation has got to be on the way forward, Mr. Chairman, that we cannot just have this at the level of government, but that we must have the private sector on board so that the private sector itself can reassess what it is doing. Its supply chains must be rethought and reconsidered. The way in which they target markets must be reconsidered, and we must therefore do everything we can as a country rather than only as a government in order to make sure that this country as a whole can continue to benefit. With regard to the general population of the country, it is not a walk in the park. A few days ago, nobody would have considered that the fact that we had a relationship with a country that has been very kind to us in our darkest hour could be a matter about which access to a third state would be called into question. And I want to say, sir, that Barbados will do nothing, this administration will do nothing to provoke that situation, but equally, we feel that we have to have conversation because it is necessary to recognize that even as I speak to you, there are Barbadian students in Cuba. And even as I speak to you, Mr. Chairman, there are in the Caribbean medical professionals who are ensuring that the single biggest threat to any country, its health system, is being held together by medical professionals from Cuba. So the conversation must be had, and even as we do that, we must not do it in an antagonistic way. We have to look at our own systems and make sure, as I said before, that what we do can clearly be seen as being in best practice, a best practice way of having functional cooperation, that it is transparent, and that it is not facilitating any unintended consequences. But Mr. Chairman, irrespective of the relationship at that level with that particular or those particular countries, there is a need, last of all, for us to broaden the base of our relationships. Generally, that is why the efforts we are making in the Middle East become so important. That is why the efforts we are making in Africa become so important. The efforts we're making in Latin America become so important. And yes, we will likely travel again. We will probably be in Asia shortly because there is a relationship which we are nurturing with Japan. When others were standing by and saying perhaps nice words of apology and sorry to hear about what happened with Beryl, there were those in Japan who were inquiring of us what would be the cost of some assistance if you needed it in terms of the repairs that you must do to your marina, the repairs you must do to your port, the better preparation that you must put in place in order to deal with the disaster management in your country. That was the invitation for conversation that we had from Japan. And as I said to you, sir, you know, this must be a diplomacy not of power, but a diplomacy of development. And that is certainly where we intend to go. I would want to say in closing, sir, simply this. I am deeply indebted to the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for coming here on the first instance at exceptionally short notice when those folks went to bed on the night in question. Before they came here, they did not know that they would be in the well of Parliament within hours. In some cases, they came to the House without even having any lunch. I am deeply indebted to them for stepping up at the time and at short notice and in the way in which they did. We have, as a ministry, to continue to work together to build out our skill sets. We have, as a ministry, to continue to work together on our capacity and our competence, whether that capacity be linguistic in nature, whether it be negotiating skills, and we are doing some internal training led by the Director General on that, whether it is just general ability to interface at all levels in trade and commerce, etc. And yes, there are some aspects of my ministry, sir, which are now at bare bones. So there is a personnel issue. And it all begins with the staff to do the job that is required. And I know it has caused my permanent secretary to grow gray hair at a rate that she otherwise would not have had to do. But we are indebted to this country for the opportunity to serve at this most critical of times in the way in which we have had the chance to serve, and we will do our best not to let the country down. We will not always get it right. We will not always have the resources to avoid making some of the mistakes that we make along the way, but we will endeavor to learn from them and to make sure that we recommit ourselves to doing the very best for the government and people of Barbados that we can do. I am obliged to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
I would like to move now, sir, that head. Sorry? I had moved it already, I thought. Yeah. Head 32 stamp part.
Thank you. Honourable members in favor, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Reported progress and request leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until March 3rd at... Sorry, reverting to government business.
Mr. Speaker, we revert to papers.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Barbados Revenue Authority's annual report for the financial year ended March 31st, 2022, and the National Insurance and Social Security Benefit Amendment Regulations 2025.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the House.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until Monday, the 3rd of March at 10 a.m. This afternoon, honourable members will be attending the funeral service, the official funeral for former Senator, Government Minister, and Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Anderson Peanuts Morris. And so that hence why we are closing off early today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that this Honourable Chairman will be suspended until Monday, the 3rd day of March, 2025 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chairman stands suspended until Monday, the 3rd day of March, 2025 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.